Hey guys, this is Coach Walker. I'm still alive. Okay, so we're going to be talking about U.S. government this way. You thought you were going to just go away and graduate. Well, I'm not letting you off that easy. Okay, we're going to get some things done. We're going to continue as we are, and hopefully we'll have you guys back here in time to talk about civil liberties, which will be our last unit, but we've got to get through the judicial branch first. So, we've done the executive, we've done the legislative. I know we spoke about just going straight to civil liberties, Bennett Lloyd, but we're not going to do it because I'd rather talk to you guys about that in person if possible. So judicial branch it's going to be. Ideally, what we do is we make a diagram out of this. Unfortunately, it's not going to quite work out that way. It's just too complicated. So I'm just going to get you guys to, just take these down as you normally would. You can type them. This is going to be the one time I'm okay with that. I am going to require you to submit them on BlackBaud, and I think I've already created a Dropbox for this specific assignment. This is going to be due Thursday, 8 a.m. Thursday, 8 a.m. Okay, I'm going to expect it at that point in time. So, without further ado, let's get to talking about it. Please do not send this video to Vinny Puccinelli. Thank you. So, when we talk about the federal court system, we're going to talk about it in terms of a three-tier system, okay? And guys, there's going to be things that I'm going to end up talking about that you're going to need to hear. So the tendency, Noah Abamont, well, who am I kidding? Noah, you're not even going to write down notes. The tendency, maybe CJ, right, is that you're going to want to pause the video, write down what you need to know, and just move on, okay? That's not going to be enough, okay? It's not going to be enough to, in terms of, the details that I'm going to ask you to know in terms of each one of these. So, for example, you're going to have to know examples of cases. You're not going to be able to do that unless you listen to the whole video, okay? Simply taking the notes and writing down the diagram is not going to be enough, okay? So, let's get to it. So, let's first discuss this third tier, okay? Let's first discuss the third tier of this entire system. So this is going to be the tier at the very top, okay? So, if we were to draw a diagram, this would be our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court is going to be the third tier. There is no court equal to the Supreme Court. So that's going to be the one you put by itself at the top, okay? There are things that are provided for the Supreme Court that aren't provided for the other courts either, hence the reason it's located. There are different types of jurisdiction. You're going to need to be aware of each one, so let's go over them. The first one I'm going to want you to be aware of is exclusive jurisdiction. Exclusive jurisdiction located here. This means that it's the only court that can hear a type of case. And write down a couple of these examples. You're going to need to know them, okay? So, I'm telling you this, but there's a couple things you need to know in addition to this, though, this is what's written down. So, for example, know that exclusive jurisdiction, as far as the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court can only hear cases, okay? Or the only cases that can be heard by the Supreme Court is or cases between states. So if you have North Carolina suing Virginia, or Virginia suing North Carolina, or Alabama, or just any other, or even the United States government, if Virginia sues the United States government, which they can do, and which they have done, then that would be exclusive jurisdiction. That isn't going to be heard anywhere else. It's going to go straight to the Supreme Court. And also, the Supreme Court would have jurisdiction over issues involving ambassadors. Okay, so ambassadors and diplomats, make sure you do write that down. Supreme Court jurisdiction over states, okay, state versus state, and then ambassadors, any case involving an ambassador from the United States or diplomat, okay? So any one of those, be aware of that. The other type of jurisdiction it's going to have, appellate. Appellate jurisdiction is exactly how it sounds. It just means that it's hearing cases of appeal. So let's talk about the Supreme Court a little bit itself. So we talked about the third tier, which is the Supreme Court, but we should know a few details about it as well. It's referred to sometimes as SCOTUS. All that is an acronym. Okay, it sounds inappropriate, but all it is an acronym for Supreme Court of the United States. It could also be called the Court of Last Resort. And why do you think that is? Giving you a chance to answer. Maybe you responded, maybe you didn't. If you know why that is, it is because it is the only, there's no court with a higher jurisdiction after that. Its word is the law, no pun intended, okay? So, once they get to that level, it's done. There are 9 justices. They are going to be appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. Thank you. This is an older picture of the Supreme Court. This isn't going to be the same court that is present today. They are going to serve life terms, so you should know that as well. Okay, so they're serving a life term, and they can serve as long as they want to serve. There's been justices who have been known to retire, okay, before obviously they've reached the end of their life. But there are quite a few, and more so than any other government position. There are a lot who end up, passing away in office. We've had a few recently that have done that. Antonin Scalia, you guys may remember. He was replaced by a Trump nominee, Neil Gorsuch. And the other one was a retiree. The other one was a retiree. That was Anthony Kennedy. He retired during Trump's administration as well, and he was replaced by Brett Kavanaugh. You should be aware of that. Go ahead and write that down as well. That Brett Kavanaugh is the most recent appointee to the Supreme Court. All right. Now, we've discussed that top tier. Now we're going to go ahead and move down a tier, okay? Now we're talking about the strictly appellate courts. And there are 4, okay? There are 4 that you're going to have to be aware of. And we're going to start with the military court. All of them are going to be hearing cases of appeal. So don't worry about that. This is just a note. Don't worry about writing this down. You would write this down if we were doing a diagram or not, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay. So, U.S. Military Court of Appeals, it's going to be the first one you're going to need to be aware of. It's going to be a military court. Some of you guys may have seen movies based off of military court situations, like A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. Go ahead and write that down too, just to prove that you're listening to me. Because sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself. But okay. 15-year terms. There are going to be 5 civil judges. All the judges are going to be military officers. The attorneys are going to be military officers. The jury, there is going to be, actually in this case, no jury. The cases are decided by the judge. And all the plaintiff and the defendant, prosecution, all that, they're all military officers. And they're convicting people of military crimes. These are going to be only criminal cases. and they're heard on appeal. So this is going to be hearing cases from the regular military court of appeals, which is at the lower tier. We'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, so regular court of appeals, that's going to be your regular, that's going to be your circuit court. These are the real workhorses of these are going to be the real workhorses of the federal court system. They're going to get the large bulk of the cases, kind of like the standing committees when we were talking about the judicial branch or the legislative branch, excuse me. They're going to end up getting a lot of those cases.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
That was my phone. Just ignore that. Hold on. All right. Sorry about that. The legislative branch, they're going to end up, standing committees would get a lot of those cases. The same deal with the regular Court of Appeals. Most federal cases are going to go through the regular Court of Appeals. And that can present a problem in terms of workload and what these courts are supposed to do. We're going to discuss this map in a second. Really, what it's all about is breaking up the courts of appeals into separate districts. What you'll see is that Virginia's in District 4. Make a note of that, please. Virginia's in District 4. Please make a note of that. We're the 4th District Court of Appeals. That could appear on your test, so go ahead and write it down. Virginia, District 4. Okay. So there is going to be circuit courts, and the reason they call them circuit courts is because literally judges would ride around on a horse to different regular courts, right? Because they were appeals judges and they had to go literally on a circuit of different courts, hear whatever cases they had on appeal, and then go on to the next court that was nearby. Now they don't have to do that. They got their own courts of appeal, so they don't have to ride around on horseback and all that. But you've got 12 courts, as you can see. The districts, the ones that are left out there are going to be your territorial courts. But then they're going to, it's important to note, not just, it's not like they're hearing 10% of cases. They're only hearing about 1%. Still, less than 1%, that is quite a bit. You think about it in terms of like, instant replay in football. How many how many plays are reviewed in football? Well, it's probably a little more than less than 1%. But as far as court cases that would be challenged, just think of it along the same lines. There has to be a reason why they're hearing that case, why it's getting appealed. Okay. The next one. So in 1982, they determined that, even though the regular Court of Appeals is only hearing less than 1%, that it is just too much for them to get done. Okay, it's too much. So what they had to do was create another Court of Appeals, and this is going to be your Court of Appeals for Federal Circuit. And there's going to be certain cases that feed into those that separate it from the regular Court of Appeals. The other one is going to be the Virginia Supreme Court. Not technically part of that federal judiciary, and that's important to be aware of. It's not going to be part of the federal judiciary. It's going to be, as far as, Virginia State, that's as high as it goes. But even so, the U.S. Supreme Court, the reason we don't call the Virginia Supreme Court the court of last resort is because technically it's not. It's at the federal level, they could agree to hear a case that was heard in the Virginia Supreme Court and overrule that ruling. Okay, but in the Virginia Supreme Court, they're going to actually serve terms. That's actually pretty unusual for state courts. We're one of the few states that do that, serve 12-year terms. Not elected positions, they're going to be appointed by the governor. Take note of that. Appointed by the governor. Okay? And they're going to have 7 judges, 12-year terms. Okay, so 7 judges appointed 12-year terms, and again, appointed by the governor. Okay, so now we need to get to talking about the first tier, and the fact of the matter is that the first tier has original jurisdiction. Okay, so with original jurisdiction, all that means is that it's the first court to hear a case. It's going to be the very first court to hear a case. So anything that comes through the court system, unless it has to do with disputes between states or, again, disputes involving ambassadors, it's going to go through the first tier of the court system. So let's go through this and see how it plays out. Okay, we're not going to worry about the YouTube video right now, okay, because I was going to show a scene from A Few Good Men. There's not really a huge point to me doing that. We're just going to get through the material, and if you want to watch A Few Good Men, it's a great movie, but if you want to watch A Few Good Men, you can go ahead and do that. Hold 1 second because I want to make sure you're aware of something. Okay. Sorry, I needed to grab something because it's going to be important for understanding how these court cases end up flowing up. This one, as you probably guessed, is anything going to the U.S. military court is going to go to the U.S. Military Court of Appeals. It's really that simple. The next box, or the next one over, okay, so the next court on the first tier is going to be your U.S. tax court. This is civil cases primarily. It's going to involve things like tax law, just anything having to do with taxes. It could be criminal law as well, so tax evasion and that sort of thing. But for the most part, it's going to have to do with tax law. And these are going to be part of the first tier. They're not going to filter up to the military courts. Court cases from the U.S. tax court are going to go to the next, so that next court on the list, which was the regular Court of Appeals. So do take note that, and I would go ahead and write this down as well, that they're going to be heard in the U.S. regular Court of Appeals. I'll say that again. They are heard in the regular, or the U.S. regular Court of Appeals. You do take note of that. All right, so the next box over is going to be the 96 district courts. Again, we said that the one that this court appeals to is going to be the one, again, this is regular Court of Appeals that this is going to filter up to. They're getting most of their workload from these district courts. They are getting most of these cases on the first tier. Important to be aware of. They're going to hear primarily criminal cases. A lot of these are listed in Article 3 of the Constitution, but just to kind of give you a brief synopsis, we'll go through all of the possible or federal criminal cases in a future lecture. But for your knowledge now, they're going to include things like kidnapping, anything involving drugs, anything involving firearms. The list, anything involving maritime law, and the list really goes on from there. So we're going to need to, eventually we'll need to be aware of that. This is enough for being aware of it now. And this is where your map comes into play. This is where, so you can't see it, but you on this map, each one of these districts are broken up into sub-districts. And that's going to be each of these 96 district courts. There are still 96 of these to this day, okay? And so the one for Richmond, in fact, both the 4th District Court of Appeals and one of the 96 district courts is located in the city of Richmond, around like Bank and 9th Street, something like that, is where you'll see, if you were to go downtown, you would see both the Federal Court of Appeals and the Court of Appeals for Federal District, or excuse me, just the Federal District. Next one is going to be the territorial courts. They're just located in the territories. That's all you got to know about them. Federal regulatory agencies. So the FCC, this is the Federal Communications Commission. If you don't know that acronym, please do write it down. In fact, go ahead and write it out. Federal Communications Commission. Good. And then the Environmental Protection Agency. You've got to be aware of both of those. Those are examples of agents. So there are cases that anything involving pollution, obviously, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Federal Communications Commission is primarily concerned with censorship. Okay, primarily concerned with censorship. There was a good Eminem song that talks briefly about the FCC and how they won't let him be. Okay. U.S. Court of International Trade, primarily to do with treaties. All you need to know about that. So U.S. Claims Court. This is going to be anybody suing for money for the federal government. After that, you're going to, again, we're getting over to the state tiers now. Virginia's Court of Appeals, and last but not least, under them is going to be the Virginia trial courts. They would hear a lot of different cases, anything involving murder, anything involving juveniles, okay, are going to be heard in those court cases. Do make a note of that. I know I don't write it down here, but we're talking about anything involving juveniles, anything involving murder, anything involving adoption laws, murder, adoption, juvie, okay? Those are the ones you're going to want to be aware of. I could pull examples of those. Okay. That's really it, okay? So what I'd like you to do is write those, with those notes, whether you wrote them or whether you typed them, go ahead and put them into the Dropbox on BlackBaud so I can see that you guys are doing something, okay? And that we are not just playing video games and whatnot, okay? So hope to see you guys soon.